Oh, okay.
Everything we're saying is part of the live stream that's being recorded that people who are already here can listen to, but I'm not going to start the actual content until that timer hits 0.
Okay. All right.
So if Raymond wants to continue his anonymity, just keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Like my cup, separated faithful, the gift of self.
Was that from the retreat?
It is. All
Okay.
right.
Looks
So
like
I'm going
it's
to get rid
0.
of that timer. Goodbye, timer. Remove. And then I'll put all of us in full screen.
Right
All right.
on.
Well, this is Mary's Advocate's first ever attempt to do a live stream. So be patient with us and technology. But what I've done is I've asked Raymond to join us to tell his experience as an annulment defendant who's trying to uphold the validity of his marriage, primarily to let the world know what's really going on down here at the diocesan level for someone in his position. I have found that one of the editors of the 1983 Code of Canon Law who is also a professor of canon law, Edward Egan, who is also one of the judges at the Roman Rota, which is the appellate tribunal. He's written an article about grave lack of discretion of judgment. And he says that most people, almost everyone, is capable of consenting to marriage, and the public knows it, and the canonists know the public know it. So that's one perspective. And then another perspective, I had reason to be talking to a canonist who was trained at a canon law school in Rome. And this canonist told me that 90% of marriages are invalid because people were too immature. So it can't be both ways. So here we go. Thank you, Mark, for joining me. And Raymond, can you hear us? Are you good?
I can. Hello. Good evening.
Okay, great. So we had prepared a couple of notes on how we wanted to start off here. Mark, are you ready to go? I'm still pulling up my notes.
It is important for us, the viewers, participants, for all Catholic leaders, priests, canonists, to hear the perspective of we who are separated from our spouses, and we refer to ourselves as separated faithful. And we will talk this evening about praying for our spouse's conversion, working on our own conversion, and to have this heart of forgiveness which the Lord calls us to have, and the fact that each of us are open to reconciling. This contrasts with guests on other presentations like this, who may not look upon the separated faithful in the same way. We have a lot of hope. We have a lot of respect for the Lord's will when it comes to marriage indissolubility. And because we're doing this for the first time, we hope you can be patient with us as we improve on this more and more. And I'd like Bay to help. She will help us. And first of all, Raymond, to start out with, what is your prayer for your divorced spouse, your family, your children?
May I cut in here?
Go ahead.
Hey, Mark, can you look at the size of your video? Because sometimes you're really close, and I noticed mine froze. So we'll keep an eye on that, please.
I keep moving because I want to be able to read.
Yeah, I understand.
So that's the first question, Raymond. What's your prayer like for your family?
So pretty much at every Sunday mass I attend, before, during, and after the mass, any daily mass that I can make, any daily rosary that I pray, any divine mercy chaplet I pray, or just in daily prayer when I can remember, I ask that God and the Holy Trinity heal our family and repair our marriage. I lift up my marriage and my spouse. I lift up my children and my family that have been broken apart by this. And I pray mostly, I used to pray specifically for her repentance, but a priest that I spoke to said, well, you're not the only one who's struggling with this heavy cross. You should be more general, because your prayers could be helping somebody else out. So I pray in general for true repentance for all of those who are living in adulterous and unholy unions, and especially for those whose children and family are affected by it and their church communities, because I know ours was. Um, it got to the point where people who were our friends for decades pretty much either chose her side or chose no side and are no longer friends with either of us. But that's my prayer, is that, reparation, uh, rep- repairing our broken relationship and a healing of our marriage, spouses, and families.
And Raymond, one of the things that I point out a lot on Mary's Advocates is the kind of like the slippery annulments that are happening, and what kind of authorities like Pope John Paul II and Cardinal Raymond Burke and Pope Benedict, they've all corrected the abuse of psychological grounds for annulment. And when a priest, before people can marry in a Catholic ceremony, a priest is obligated to undergo a premarital investigation to like get to find out, do you guys really intend marriage, and are you guys seeming to be fit? So what happened when you and your wife wanted to get married? Did you have one of those meetings with priests?
Oh yeah, definitely. We met with our lead pastor. We were already attending his church for at least a year or more. My spouse even longer. So he knew us very well. He baptized our two children. Um, when he met with us, he asked us all the questions. He made us fill out all the questionnaires. I, at the time, even though we were both cradle Catholics, had not received the sacrament of confirmation. And I was already in my 20s. So I had to go through that because we wanted to get married in a Catholic church. So yes, I feel the priest feels that we went through all the proper investigation by the parish and the priest who was marrying us and going through our marriage prep.
Yeah, because I kind of wonder from the priest perspective, if they meet the parties when they get married, like they meet the parents of the bride and groom, they meet the best man, maid of honor, and maybe they've seen you around the parish for a time, like you're saying, you weren't just going to have your pretty pictures with your wedding in the church. For those kind of couples, I'm wondering if these priests are scratching their head wondering, wait a minute, how could it be that 90% of these people are so immature they can't get married? So that's a question that I'm hoping they're asking themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the priest was so confident, and we'll probably get into this later on, but he was actually my witness, or one of my witnesses, and stated outright without any confusion that we definitely both knew what we were getting into when we were before, during, and after our marriage prep and during up to our wedding day.
And how long were you married? Or I should say, how long were you living together? Because you're still married. But how long were you living together before she started having her angst and her desire to leave?
Well, my spouse filed for divorce in 2020. It was delayed about 4 to 6 months due to COVID. Um, According to her timeline, she had wanted to get divorced either right at the end of 2019 or in January of 2020. At that point, we had been living together. We never separated. We literally went from um, living together in a rental home at the time. We had already sold our home, but we were at that time we were married over 15 years, not quite 20. Now at this point, we're over 20 years married in the Catholic Church, and I often repeat that stat to people because they were like, "Well, you're divorced," and I said, "Well, yeah, but we're still married in the church over 20 years, so
And,
we're between 20 and 25 years." Two almost adult children; they're in their late teens.
and she started to get a little nervous, or how did she convey to you that she wanted to?
So pre-COVID, we got into some serious financial issues, and it got to the point where we basically had to determine whether we were going to put a second mortgage in our house or sell it and take the equity and start all over again. She was not keen on that idea at all. And again, like I said, I was going through some financial issues with my business at the time, and I was searching around for another opportunity to make more money. She basically at that point reached out to me and said she was going to give me a year to get my stuff together, in not so nice words, or else she was going to divorce me. And like I said, during that time, we moved into a rental. We were still living together, never separated. And then unbeknownst to me, after she filed divorce and it was finalized, I reluctantly went into that, signed the divorce decree, reluctantly, because it was ultimately her decision. Her lawyer brought all the paperwork. I looked it over. Unbeknownst to me, she was already planning on moving in with a mutual friend of ours. So the divorce was filed in mid 2020. 3 or 4 months later, she moved our children and herself in with this supposedly mutual friend of ours, and they are now civilly married. They got civilly married not even within a year of our divorce being finalized.
Raymond, may I break in here?
Mm-hmm.
When she was telling you these like ultimatums, did she look like she cared about being a good Catholic? Like, did she care about being a Catholic? Did you go to try to get any help from any Catholic leaders that you knew? How did that play out, if at all?
So between when she gave me the ultimatum and when she filed for divorce, I did ask her if she had spoken to anybody, and she basically let it be known to me, just based on her words, that she had spoken to a nun, and the nun had verified that if she felt that I was being insincere in the marriage and not following my marriage vows, that she had every right to divorce me. I never spoke to that nun. I wish I had, but I don't know who she was. I basically just took my wife's word for it. By the time I went out and reached out for anybody's support, we had already been divorced and we were already living separately. And she was already living with that other gentleman that we spoke of. So, I mean, to answer your question, yes, she reached out. There was no encouraging whatsoever for reconciliation, and as far as I know, because by the time I spoke to a priest, we were already, more than a year out.
And this is in stark contrast to what the church teaching says the position of the church is supposed to be, which is to facilitate reconciliation always and never lose hope of reconciliation. So, I mean, I would think that if you were if you were a nun who knew what the church says about marriage, you would know not to give somebody the green light to go get divorced just after hearing one person's story. This is very serious. And that person, that whoever that nun was, I don't think she had any, well, I mean, I actually know based on canon law and doctrine and historical jurisprudence that an individual like that doesn't have any authority to give someone to go ahead to get the red light to go get divorced. And instead, the church's position should have been, whoa, we need to get you guys the right kind of help. We're going to do whatever we can, and so on and so forth. So, and then even after the fact that you go for priests and things, they're like, well, there's nothing we can do. The divorce is already there. Well, imagine some other thing that the catechism says is a grave offense against nature and immoral. And if someone was repeatedly doing it and there was a victim going to the church saying, can you help me? I mean, wouldn't the church say, well, if I know who that person is, yeah, sure, I'll pull them aside and ask to have a conversation. Well, anyways, that's my rant.
Did she, Raymond, did she even want to look like a good Catholic? Was she concerned about her being a faithful, authentic Catholic during this time?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, on the surface, yeah, I believe entirely that she's probably right now currently thinks she's a good Catholic in good standing, despite her living situation. Between the couple, I mean, one of them's employed in the archdiocese there, and one of them has family that's not a priest, but what do we say, ordinate? Ordained in the archdiocese. So when all this happened, I reached out to some of them and none of them wanted to talk to me about it. And I was like, well, supposedly we're all cradle Catholics and we're good, faithful Catholics. We never miss Sunday Mass. What's going on here? And I was just shunned. And again, I know she wants to appear like a good Catholic, and I'm sure the man she's living with is civilly married. Probably thinks that he's a good Catholic in good standing.
Wow.
Okay, so Mark, do you have any more questions about the divorce?
No, I wanted to, because we're at the 15 minutes after, I think I want to get started on what his next step was. And we can, migrate into that annulment process. I think wasn't it Raymond, your wife, who filed for the annulment eventually?
Yes. So after the divorce was finalized in the middle of 2020, I was looking out for that, and probably about 6 or 9 months, we're starting to get into 2021. I actually reached out to the archdiocese where we were residing at the time, and spoke to the director there, and gave my name, gave her name. She looked it up. She actually found one of her family members who had filed for an annulment there, but not ours. And then the director, called me back a few weeks later and said, "Oh, by the way, your wife just filed today." So, and that was literally a whole year. So now I found out after the fact, years later, that our diocese, our archdiocese tribunal, requires 1 year of divorce before you can even file for an annulment. And she
So
pretty much filed a year to the date from our divorce.
may I interject?
Hmm.
The diocese where your wife petitioned for an annulment requires 1 year of divorce before they'll investigate whether a marriage is valid or not.
Correct.
So what's supposed to happen to all those couples where one party had questions about the validity and that's why they got the divorce? Like they wanted to find out if their marriage was valid, and the diocese says, well, you got to be divorced for a year first. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I can't speak to what she was instructed. That's kind of what we talk about later when I'm appealing all this, because I was not made privy to any of those conversations, or I never saw information concerning how she was instructed to file for this annulment.
So what was your journey through the annulment process? How did it start? And we'll interject questions if there's things we wonder about.
Yeah. So approximately a year after our divorce, we're in 2021, middle of 2021, I received a letter stating that my wife was wanting to file a divorce, or she was wanting to get an annulment, um, and that if I could please answer this 20-page questionnaire. With all this personal stuff, it was basically a mini autobiography about myself, covered a lot of personal information. At that point, I had already reached out to a local retired deacon and a person who actually worked in the tribunal, who was kind of frustrated with the way the tribunals were being run and thought I had a great case to support my marriage. Um, the with the letter about her applying, they asked me to fill out the questionnaire. Um, the people told me to do that, to go ahead and fill out the questionnaire. I received an immediate letter stating that, thank you for filling this questionnaire out. These are the grounds for the divorce. And this, say again.
May I interject?
Sure.
When you got that first letter, I have found that tribunals are supposed to decide. Well, a judicial vicar is supposed to decide even before you get notified. He's supposed to decide based on the petitioner's petition, also called a libellus. The judicial vicar, who's the guy in charge of a tribunal, is supposed to look at that libellus petition and decide, does this have the grounds? Does she describe her grounds? And does she give enough facts and proofs in a general way that this might be a real case? And that's supposed to be mailed to you. Was there any indication of her having filled in something like that? Was it mailed to you at the very, very beginning?
No. So I received that letter saying that my wife had filed for an annulment case, and if I could fill out this questionnaire to aid in their search. In the letter, it was notarized, and it had I forget the name for it, but on the bottom it said there was enclosures.
Sure.
There were the libellus that you talk about.
Mhm.
One, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that it was part of the whole process, but it wasn't included.
So they put at the bottom of this notification letter enclosures, and they have the word libellus, but nobody knows what a libellus is unless you look up stuff on Mary's Advocates or do your own research.
Yeah. Before watching your videos, I did not know at all what that was, and if that it was a proper requirement so essentially that's supposed to have her testimony, and you could probably explain it better than me, but I never saw anything handwritten or signed by my wife to this point in time.
Yeah, and it's just enough to tell the judge you have a real case. Like, I mean, this is a civil suit about nullity of an agreement. So imagine any kind of other agreement that, say Mark and I enter an agreement. Well, I don't know, he's going to do some commission work for me, and we have a contract that's written up, and then he comes back and says, whoa, this whole agreement is botched and null because they tricked me into signing it when I was hypnotized or when I was asleep or when I was drunk or I don't know what. So it's like, if Mark was to complain that this whole agreement we have is null and void, he would have to allege in his suit, what's the basis for that claim, and then give a little bit of a narration, not every single bit of testimony and witnesses and all, but at least a little bit, so that a judge could know, well, is this a real case or is Mark being silly? And if you never got that at all, that's an incorrect way of starting a case.
Right. I mean, I never got that. When the advocate was assigned to me, he never informed me of my rights or what I could do or not do. He was employee of the tribunal, obviously. Like I said, I had already reached out to another person who was employed there, and I basically, he said, he's like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I would suggest that you appoint me as your advocate, because I think you have a strong case to defend your marriage. That led up to the review of the acts. First I switched advocates to the person who used to work there. But when it came time to review the acts, which was basically her testimony, her questionnaire and witnesses that were filled out, he basically vanished out of thin air. And to this day, I haven't talked to him. I have no idea why he disappeared on me on the day of reviewing the acts. But I'm probably jumping ahead of myself. I think so.
Let me go back and ask you a little bit more about this 20-page questionnaire, or
Sure.
Your answers were 20 pages. You said that was like a mini autobiography. At the time that you were filling that out, you were just following the instructions, right?
Correct.
And,
I did not know that I had the option not to fill it out.
I mean, we know Mary's Advocates publicizes that they're only supposed to ask questions related to the grounds they're investigating, not your whole biography and autobiography. But you answered those questions before you even knew what grounds they were investigating?
Correct. Again, I never got a libelous or any exact canonical reasons as to why our marriage was going to be judged as null. I was just told that a case had been, or my wife was requesting an annulment, and oh, by the way, I needed to fill out this questionnaire.
And what I found, I've been doing a lot more research on this, maybe the last year. A judge isn't allowed to be his own. A judge is not allowed to be the petitioner. The petitioner has to be the petitioner. So your wife is supposed to give the judge something that describes the grounds she thinks and gives the facts and proofs in a general way. And that would start the relationship between the petitioner and the judge. But then when it comes to the respondent, you're just a free agent minding your own business who's been abandoned by your wife, as far as you know. The judge is supposed to establish a judge-respondent relationship with you. But that doesn't happen until you're properly cited, where you're advised, hey, here's a copy of the petition. Here's the grounds that she's alleging in her own language and her own words supporting those grounds. So,
do you think, Raymond, that she had an advocate? Did she have any help?
So again, my spouse and her civil husband now both have friends and family that are either employees or work or people in the church. And so I strongly feel that she's getting coached as to what she should do in these situations. Like I said, I never saw a statement from her. I never saw anything signed by my wife.
Nor her procurator or anybody.
No, this whole situation from start to end just seems like a lot of shuffling behind closed doors that I wasn't made privy to. So to answer your question, I strongly feel like she was being coached as to what she needed to do to get this out of the way.
So you've given him the testimony before you even knew what grounds there were. They eventually did mail you a letter telling you what grounds they were doing?
Correct. I got the letter after the questionnaire had been sent in fairly quickly, probably within a month. And then they opened up the case and basically said they were going to use it. That
What
both of us, both spouses were going to be up for 1092. I gotta look again because I always forget.
1095-2, the loose
And
cannon, grave lack of discretion of judgment regarding the
correct.
rights and obligations of marriage, the loose
Yeah.
cannon. And this is the one that JP2 and Benedict and Cardinal Raymond Burke and have publicly said this one is not being used correctly. And it's psychological grounds. Psychological grounds that someone just wasn't capable of consent. So
Yeah,
so
I mean,
that's the one we understand that is used most often.
and when I looked up the definition, my thought was, well, good luck trying to prove that either on my case or on my spouse's case, because how do you prove that? I learned after doing some research and meeting Mary's advocates that yeah, it's like you said. I mean that term is used so loosely and improperly. It's kind of crazy.
So,
So then, go ahead.
oh, I'm just going to ask you real quick. Canon 1095 is about capability. Do you really think that either yourself or your wife are incapable of committing to marriage for life?
Consenting to marriage,
Consenting to marriage. Yeah.
No, not at all. In fact, when I responded back to the letter, one of the things that was included was, how am I going to respond? Am I just going to leave this alone, let them do it? Am I going to challenge this, or I don't want to part any in this investigation? And I wrote him a letter, a lengthy letter, based on instruction from the deacon and the former employee that were helping me at the time, that both and I knew exactly what we were getting into. And, my witness, because I knew I was going to use the priest as a witness, knew what they were getting into, knew what we were getting into. Um, and I kind of felt like the only reason this whole annulment was going in place is because she was trying to save face by getting married in the Catholic Church. Yes.
We got a comment from John that says, "Where is Raymond from?" So
The U.S. I don't think I want to be more specific.
We're deliberately letting Raymond be anonymous.
And the reason why I want to be anonymous for right now is, Bay knows this. I've already petitioned the Roman Rota to throw the whole case out. We'll get to this later, but so this is still up in the air as far as I'm concerned.
Right. So can you talk more about what happened when you did finally go in to read the acts of the case, which is the record, her testimony, any witnesses you had testimony? How did that go?
Not good. So by that point of the publication of the acts, when I was going to be able to see her proofs and her witnesses' testimony, I was already living far away from our original tribunal. So to keep things anonymous, I'm just going to refer to it as the local tribunal and the tribunal where I was residing. I had asked the local tribunal where I was residing if I could review the acts over there. They reached out to the original tribunal and said, yeah, I think that's good. So, it was still a 2-hour drive to get over to the tribunal where I resided. On my way over there, I received an email from the head director saying, oh, by the way, just so you know, like, we're going to make you state an oath of like secrecy or something like that. You probably know the correct terms. Basically, I wasn't going to tell anybody about anything that I saw or I witnessed. And then also, I was only going to have an hour, and I wasn't going to be allowed to take any notes whatsoever. No photos, no handwritten notes, nothing. And I would have to be in and out of there in an hour. Well, at that point,
I'll interject a question here. Was that instruction of 1 hour and no notes from the close tribunal where you were driving, or was it the tribunal that was doing the investigation, or both?
So originally, it was from the one I was residing at.
Okay.
But by the time I got there, at this point, I had already reached out to you, and you were kind of instructing me on my options. And my advocate at the time basically was of no help. He wasn't answering my texts or calls. You basically had advised me to basically, write on a letter saying, I promise, as in best words I could, I promise that I'm not going to use this written notes or my handwritten notes for anything other than the defense of my marriage. And can I please, pretty please, take notes, because I'm not going to be able to remember all this stuff. So when I walked into the the tribunal of my residence, I sat down there. They asked me to take the oath, and I was basically like, "No, I'm not going to take the oath because And at that point, I was very angry. I basically just said, "I'm not going to take the oath because I just kind of feel there's a lot of secrecy here, and I don't really understand the purpose of that oath. I've already told you in this letter that I'm not going to share that information for anything other than to defend my marriage."
Let me interject here, Raymond. Excuse me. When you said you got the idea from Mary's Advocates, there is a law about annulments, and it's Dignitas Connubii. And in there, they describe the oath that a tribunal is welcome to ask any party to take before they read the record of the case. And it includes the exact language that I suggested that you use, which is this thing that I'm only use the information I learned from inspecting the acts not known to me for the purpose of defending my position in the annulment case. So for them to say no to that, and you're not allowed to take notes, and you only have an hour, well, for them not to think that's good enough, it's like they're going beyond the law. And the other thing that's challenging, well, I've done surveys of different tribunals all over the country, and half of them say, of course you can take notes. How are you supposed to keep track of all that stuff and respond intelligently if you don't take notes? And then other ones say, oh no, we don't let people take notes. And no, the law does say you're not allowed to make copies, like a whole photocopy. Only the advocate is allowed to get his own copy of all of those things, but that some people are allowed to take notes in some parts of the country and people aren't allowed in other parts of the country. I mean, this is enough said. So I
want to clarify what the acts of the case really encompass. Isn't the acts of the case including the defender of the bonds statement? Is it including all the witnesses who testified to either the mindset of Raymond and his wife were on the day of their wedding? What exactly is included in the acts? I
can address what's supposed to be in the acts. It's supposed to be the whole record of the case that's in the tribunal that the judges might use when they make their case.
So it's all the information they need to say this is the reason why this marriage is null, or we're going to uphold validity. So they're right at that doorstep where they make that final decision.
Not exactly, because there's two phases. There is a first phase before this publication of the acts where the parties can inspect the record of the case not yet known to them. So that would include both parties' testimony, any witness testimony. Then both parties get a chance to complete the proofs where they now can give rebuttals of what the other person had said or what witnesses said. If they wanted to add something to rebut that, they could ask the judge to interview new witnesses if they saw something that they thought was important and it was false and they wanted to have it corrected. Then after this completion of the proofs, the tribunal allows the parties to read it again if there's new information. This doesn't go on to infinity, though. At some point, the tribunal can say, okay, that's enough. We've let you both go through it once with responses and see each other's responses. The defender of the bond is like a third party, and his role is to always uphold the marriage. And he also submits it's his observations, and both parties are supposed to get to read that also, though that would be exchanged a little bit later when they're done collecting the testimony and they're at the stage where everyone's exchanging their briefs. So there you have it.
To piggyback on Deborah's note here, does the acts always include the defender of the bonds defense of the marriage? Is that normal?
Well, if they're doing the first publication of the acts, you wouldn't have in existence yet the defender of the bonds observation. Oh. However, when they're done with the collecting testimony, there's another phase, which is, I'm going to call it exchange of briefs, like legal briefs. And the judge is supposed to tell people how many weeks they have or days they have to get certain things in. At that stage, one should definitely be able to see the testimony of the defender of the bond because he is a third party in the case. His role is to defend the marriage.
And hopefully, if you have an advocate in your diocesan tribunal, that advocate will keep you informed of this.
Yep.
because it seems like they're in a rush to get it done. That's my hasty general opinion about how this works. What do you think, Raymond? Do you think you were given all the information you were entitled to?
Well, in retrospect, no, but let me just go back to, so at the tribunal of where I resided, basically after I gave them the letter, they went to the back, they reached out to the Judge Vicar in the other tribunal where the original tribunal of the annulment case. They sent I don't remember if it was a fax or an email, but basically that Judge Vicar said, we respectfully will make you submit to the rules of the diocese where you're at, because those are our rules too, and you would have had to abide by those rules at the original tribunal. So at that point, there had been a lot of time that passed. The head director said, you know what, you either have like 20 minutes to review these or you got to reschedule it. So I decided to reschedule it at the original tribunal. And that's where my advocate, who I had personally asked to be my advocate and said he was going to help me, he literally ghosted me as I was walking up to the tribunal, sent me a text saying he wasn't going to be available to look at them. So I had to go in there by myself. At that point, what I saw in reviewing the acts was just a bunch of page after page of typewritten documents with no identification. I basically had to like figure out by what I was reading who was saying it. I mean, I obviously knew what my wife's testimony was, but in terms of the witnesses, there was no names or identifications. I kind of had to figure it out just based on what they were saying. And we could talk more about that if you want, but
Yeah,
essentially,
were there any, like you're saying, these pages and pages, were there any signatures on the pages? So it authenticated, yes, this is a testimony of person A or person B?
no signatures, no identification of names, no people were named. It literally, like, for example, one of the witnesses, I could tell just by the way it was written and edited that it was her sister. But it was that they were trying to be that inconspicuous. They actually changed some of the wording so that it didn't sound like it was her sister.
Did was your wife's testimony, that was her testimony, was that signed and dated?
No, again, I've never seen my wife's signature on any paperwork through this entire process.
Okay.
I've seen no signatures other than the Judge Vicar in this process.
This raises the question, who typed up those papers? Did your wife type up those papers? Did some helper in the diocese who wanted to make sure those two people who were intertwined with the diocese? It's like, these aren't legitimate acts of a case. These aren't legitimate records. So that'll come later when we talk about the things that, I mean, there is a part of canon law, and it talks about what is a legitimate act. What is a legitimate, and if it's not signed by the person it's from, they don't know who wrote it. So if they're using that to make a decision, that is questionable. But maybe
Right.
I'm imagining the tribunal did to you what they do to everyone. And I'm imagining that this is not the only tribunal in the United States that does this. So that's notable. So you're short on time, no notes, no identifying information, no signatures. And when you were reading all this testimony, were you seeing things that supported the true definition of grave lack of discretion of judgment and 5-2 loose cannon? Was your wife complaining about her mental instability when you were dating and at the time you were married, and she just couldn't use her intellect and will to know what was going on?
Not at all.
About you?
No, the testimony that I read from my spouse and from her witnesses were basically just bad mouthing me. Most of them didn't even really know me before we got married. They knew me years after. They would talk about what they thought my parents may have been doing to have money that they had. It had nothing to do with the marriage. It had nothing to do with our annulment case. They were just bad mouthing my character. My spouse's testimony was basically page after page of her just not being happy with the marriage after the fact. Had nothing to do with our engagement, our dating, our courtship, our wedding day, anything like that. It was all after the fact. After we'd been married, I realized, my husband was underwhelming. He was not the father I thought he'd be to my children, blah, blah, blah. And it had nothing to do with the 1095 or 0.2, whatever, psychopathology issue.
Okay. So then time goes by. What did you do about rebuttal proofs? Did they give you 3 weeks or whatever? Now, after you read it, it's like, okay, Your wife had all this time to prepare her testimony. Now that you've seen for the first time ever any facts and proofs, you now have time to respond. How that?
No, so
that?
as soon as I stepped out of their tribunal office with their witness, and the witness inspected me to make sure I didn't have any like pens or paper on me, I basically walked out, and I was met immediately, and I mean immediately as I opened the door, by the judge vicar, who wanted me to give a statement on what I had just read. He asked me several times, and I was like, absolutely not. I said, I haven't even talked to my advocate, who's supposedly supposed to be here and get a copy of this stuff. We were supposed to look it over and talk about it together. He asked me again very nicely, well, why don't you just give your rebuttal on what you just read? I was like, I feel like I just told you why, and I would appreciate it if you quit asking me. I will wait until I talk to my advocate and he gets a copy of this. Well, again, the advocate ghosted me, so the advocate never got a copy. So, it was basically just me that reviewed the acts, and that's it. And to answer your question, Bay, I don't ever think I made a statement because I didn't know what that was all about. I didn't know that was a step. Keep in mind at this point, I don't have an advocate. My advocate's ghosted me. I'm on my own, and so basically they just proceeded on. And
So from here, Raymond, did you just, the next act, or next, shall we say, action by the tribunal was to give you the final sentence? Is that
right? So probably about I don't know, 4 to 6 months later, they sent me a letter stating that they wanted to make the decision public, but they needed me to review it. I guess that's kind of what you were talking about, Bain. I'm not sure, but they sent me a letter saying that I needed to go back to the tribunal under the same scenario, an hour to review their decision. I'm not allowed to take notes or anything like that. Or I could just say I accept whatever the tribunal says without having even read it.
Okay, I want to cut in here to make the distinction. Reading the record of the case and all the testimony that's not known to you yet is one part of the process. Giving both parties their own copy of the final definitive sentence that describes their rationale and their decision based in law and facts, that's a different process. That's giving a party his own copy of the final definitive sentence. And they're telling you that the only way you're going to see that thing is under the same restrictions that they put you when you inspected the record of the case. No notes, shortened time, and you only get to read it in the office, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the way I read that letter, and I believe you have a copy of it as well, is that, yeah, we have not published this decision, but you are welcome to review it before we publish it, or you can just let it be, and we'll let you find out what the decision is.
Okay, so fast forward, how did you ever get your hands on the full definitive sentence?
Thanks to Mary's advocates, I was able to petition to the Roman Rota, basically saying, hey, I don't think this is fair at all. They're making me look at a decision without any time to process it or take notes on it. How am I going to be able to defend or deny anything that's in it if I don't even remember, I don't have a didactic memory to look over pages and pages and quotations and citations. So I sent it to the Roman Rota. That was around sometime in the late summer of 2023. And then within about 4 months, I got in my mailbox, I got the copy of the decision with a fairly, strict note from the judge vicar saying, I'm absolutely positively not allowed to share this with anybody. For no particular reason other than he just doesn't want me to.
Yeah, like you're not supposed to publish it, like put it on the internet.
Well, I wasn't planning on it, but I would have to show it to somebody in order to help me write. I mean, I'm not a canon lawyer. I don't know what half of that stuff means.
Yeah, I to my understanding, when the Roman Rota issues a sentence, when a sentence is issued, well, actually, I don't know what tribunals do. I know when the Roman Rota issues a sentence, it says at the top, you're not supposed to publish this to anybody. Like, don't publish it. Talking about it is something else. So then you finally got your own copy of the sentence. Did the investigating tribunal tell you why they changed their mind?
Change their mind about giving me a copy?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were basically told so by the Signatura in Rome, that to quit playing around with this guy and give him a copy of his sentence so he can look it over and decide whether he wants to accept it or appeal it.
Okay. So now that you had that, then you let the local, so we already know that you've got an appeal at the Rota right now. So you have to let the local tribunal first know, hey, I'm intending to lodge an appeal. And then you send your reasons of appeal to the Roman Rota. So,
Right. But after reading the decision, I felt strongly that none of their decision was based on the whole 1095.2 stance that they were supposedly basing the whole case on. The way the case read is like, you're good, you understood what you were getting into, but she was not. But then all the supporting evidence they gave had really nothing to do with psychological issues or anything. This is like they were approving it. They wanted to approve the marriage null, but they were, I mean, the evidence that they were showing was kind of like their own words, their own interpretation of quotations or events as they understood it, not actual events. I mean, there was stuff in there where I was like, I don't recall ever seeing that in her acts, and I know I didn't write it, so where are they getting this?
so that's even just talking about the merits of the case, the reasons they decided what they decided.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely didn't decide the case based on the 1095.2 or whatever.
I want to ask a question to clarify a distinction. When you make an appeal, there's two kinds of appeal. One kind of appeal is the whole case should be thrown out because they violated procedure so terribly that it doesn't really count as a real case. The other kind of appeal is appealing on the merits. What was their rationale based on the facts that they collected? You did both kinds, right?
I mean, I felt I kind of had to, because I felt from start to finish that the whole thing, I mean, at this point we're over 2 years into the annulment case, and I never felt like I was being treated fairly. I literally had to go to Rome just to get a copy of the decision to look over. So, and again, by then I already knew that the libelous, I've never seen anything with my wife's signature on it whatsoever. You know, the the reason for the annulment investigation only occurred after I had filled out my 20-page questionnaire, which, oh, by the way, I didn't know I could deny filling that out. So yes, I basically asked them initially, I asked the Roman Rota to throw out the case just based on improper procedures,
No.
mostly because I never received a libelous.
Hey, Mark, do you have notes on the kinds of irregularities that Raymond experienced as he was
Yes.
talking there?
Absolutely.
I want to go through those, and I'll just summarize them if your notes aren't clear.
Sure. And I'm sure this was in the original appeal to the Rota. Was
the only one the one that's sitting there right now.
Right. That the trial, that you did not receive a real libellus or petition or citation, and it was missing what's required for you as a respondent to receive.
Yep. So that would be the citation was missing the required element, where Raymond's citation, the very beginning, had to include a copy of a wife's libellus petition, and it didn't. And even before that, Raymond said he's never seen anything signed by his wife. So the case might have started without an actual petition at all. Maybe the wife just submitted a biography or an autobiography, and that's illegal. Canon 1620 describes grounds for the whole case to be irremediably null, irreparable, and starting with no libellus is one of them.
What else? On top of that, he was not able to challenge, because if you don't get their libellus, how do you challenge it as a respondent? So we did not have the opportunity to do that. And the proofs were, obviously we talked about the acts and what they were, and what already Raymond has said, that they didn't even provide evidence for a canon 1095 annulment, challenging the capacity of either party to meet the essential obligations of marriage. And it was, again, we heard that he didn't even have a chance to respond, a rebut. Did he ever, he wasn't really felt comfortable in rebutting what the acts and what the material case that was made. And the juridic acts used by the judge to decide the case look really, really a matter of opinion.
Well, that they weren't signed by anybody.
Yeah.
no name, I call those invalid juridic acts. Something screwy with that.
So, okay.
And then
no handwritten notes, and he was only you can only read this for 1 hour. Are you kidding me? How can anybody, and Raymond is a well-educated man. He's a professional. How could you expect any Catholic respondent to be able to digest something that he's not even familiar with in 1 hour and not be able to take any notes? So that by itself should be grounds for just throwing this case out based on procedure.
So I think we covered all the things. And there was something I learned about from a paper by a professor at Catholic U. One can challenge that the decree issued by the judge accepting the petition is a null juridic act, because in order for it to be legitimate, it has to have the things required. And in order for a decree accepting the wife's petition to count, there has to be reasons. And if there's no petition giving any reasons for the annulment, then there's no valid decree accepting. I mean, it's just not right. So all those things that you talked about are on appeal right now at the ROTA. And then the business and then the things on the merits, if they let you go back and redo, letting you take your own notes so that you can submit proper rebuttals. What kinds of things have you appealed on the merits so far? Did anything strike you?
Well, again, I mean, none of her testimony indicated anything. Again, this whole 1095.2 never was, there was no evidence or in the proofs, definitely not on mine and not on hers. And I kind of feel like they twisted my words when I was filling out the questionnaire to kind of cite her for that, which makes no sense because they took my words out of context. You know, I wasn't saying she didn't know what she was getting into. I just said that based on what I know in her upbringing, like she could have like had issues with certain things that, you know, may have played into the troubles in our marriage. But by no means was I saying she was like psychologically impaired. I've never thought that of her at all.
Right. And I
You
think
never did see the defender of the bond report, did you?
I mean, in the sentence that I received a copy of, but that one also, it's like basically all the defender said is like, the defender says there that I did receive a libelous, and I'm like, no, told you, I'm literally basing the whole thing like this was either a clerical error that they said it was enclosed and I never saw it, but I've never seen anything with my wife's signature at all stating that she wanted to file for an annulment. It's all been typed out clerical stuff from the tribunal.
So the defender of the bond did not defend the marriage.
No, she basically just said this step was done, this step was done, this step was done. And then she goes on to say, well, in my personal opinion, you know, I kind of feel like he got a bad, maybe a wife who didn't really know what she was getting into. And that's a complete opposite of what she should be doing.
Right.
we've got a question here that it took me a long time to get to talk about. Do you know if the witnesses were interviewed in person when they gave testimony or whether they answered questionnaires? Do you even know?
I can only speak for my witnesses because what I received in that initial packet was, you know, my intent on what I was going to do. Was I going to challenge it or was I just going to let the you know, question of annulment go? And there was the questionnaire, my questionnaire, and then there was pages for up to three witnesses. And I could have made copies if I wanted more, but I just went with three witnesses. So my witnesses did receive that form. They did sign off on it and it was mailed to them. But what I received in reviewing her acts, it was just typed out paperwork with no names, no signatures.
When you mean the form, you mean when they cited you, they showed you the questionnaire that they would send to witnesses, or they just wanted the contact information for witnesses?
No, they had questions. They had the witness form, like who I was going to use for witnesses, and they had some. I believe they had some questions there, if I remember correctly.
Okay, but
Like how you
nonetheless,
know these people, how long have they been married, how do you know them, like what do you think about them, things like that, just general things.
when you talk to any of the witnesses after the fact, do you remember if they told you whether they went into an in-person meeting to give testimony and they met the judge, or whether they just answered a questionnaire? Do you remember?
I remember that they said that they just mailed in the questionnaire and they received a call basically just affirming that they were who they said they were.
Okay.
So we're not sure who really wrote that witness statement. If it was the witness or him herself, or was it someone else?
Yeah, I mean, again, I just gave the questionnaire to the witness, my witnesses,
Yeah.
and I know when I reviewed when I reviewed the acts, which included my witnesses because I hadn't seen it prior to then, and her witnesses, it was just all typed up. So I had to kind of figure out who's like. Obviously, it said my witnesses and her witnesses, but like to figure out who they were,
Yeah.
it was pretty easy because one of them I knew was my priest, so he was easy to figure out. The other two, I really couldn't tell you like which was which.
And this is the priest that already told you in advance that he thinks when he met you two, when you were getting ready to get married, you were fine.
Yeah, I mean, so that's another thing that I included in my letter to Rome or my appeal to Rome. It's like, look, when I review the acts, like this priest said, this is a priest that married us. This is a priest that did our premarital counseling. Like he literally said in no uncertain terms, we knew what we were getting into, and that's that. And they did not include that at all in the information. They completely like if that witness didn't even exist. And then when I explained to them in my initial letter, when I was saying I was going to fight the annulment, I said, I was like, this is just all shell games. She's already civilly married. We've been divorced for a year. She's just trying to do this to look like a good Catholic. And I believe in marriage. Whether she does or she doesn't, I believe my marriage was a valid sacrament and I stand by that. I don't think she may or may not believe that, but if she did, she wouldn't be doing what she's doing. And again, they just kind of ignored all that.
Okay.
That's why I pray daily for repentance on both their parts and for healing on all our families, because it's really bad.
I want to read some comments here. There's several of them in Rome from Deborah. Because there's several, I'm just going to read them. I was called into the tribunal to be deposed. It was recorded and transcribed. My husband also had an in-person interview, and the witnesses had phone interviews. So, and then someone else says, I will go into the tribunal to give my deposition. This thankfully has been after my advocate has read the acts, the testimony so far. So your tribunal is treating people differently than some of the viewers that are joining us right now.
Well, I mean, either way, though, don't you think? I mean, okay, so people get recorded. What's to say that what they said is actually translated correctly by the person?
Transcribed. And then, I mean, the law itself says it gets transcribed. And then the person who was the witness or the party is given a copy of the transcript. The law in Dignitas Connubii specifies you thereafterwards get to read it and correct it. So remove what doesn't represent what you meant to say and correct things that are incorrect. And then you sign it, so that the acts of the case include a testimony by a person who attests, yes, that's what I intended to testify about.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. There was a lot of information to cover. Thank you, Raymond. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, all those who joined. If I didn't get to all your comments, sorry about that. It's challenging to be on both sides. But we'll do more of these if you like them. And if there's other people who are trying to defend their marriage and they had experiences that just don't make any sense, if the Catholic Church is always trying to reconcile people.
And never cease in seeking reconciliation.
Amen.
Hopefully on the 13th.
Okay. We are going to sign off. I'm going to end the stream. Thank you all.
Good evening.
Bye, Mark.
Bye-bye.